Hello, and welcome to another segment of the Coatesville Area Public Library's Oral History Project. I'm talking today with Mr. Ed Wilkinson, who is another native of the city of Coatesville. Ed, thank you for joining us today. We're glad to have you with us.
My pleasure, Kirk.
I understand that you were born in an apartment on Fleetwood Street, or what is now Fleetwood Street. Tell us about that.
Well, actually, I was born in the apartment above the store at First and Walnut, right across from Lucan's number 1 Millgate.
Uh-huh.
And then we moved from there to Fleetwood Street, and I grew up on Fleetwood Street.
Mm-hmm. And your mother was running a boarding house there?
My mother and the lady next to her, Mrs. Howe, ran a boarding house, and we had many people coming and going. When they electrified the railroad, my mother and Mrs. Howe housed and fed 13 men. They fed them complete breakfast and packed their lunch, and then fed them their dinner. And before Mrs. Smith thought about making small pies, my mother was making them and sending them in the lunch with these men. I always enjoyed the rainy days because as a kid, they wouldn't work on the rainy days and they played poker, something they called Penny Ante at the time. And when coming home, they'd put a whole pile of pennies in the middle of our dining room table, and I could use one hand and grab as many pennies as I could hold on to, and they'd let me keep them. That's a fond memory.
There must have been some interesting characters in that bunch of boarders. Anyone in particular stick out in your mind?
Yes, we had one man who roomed with us and boarded with us for about 12 years. This was Leslie Brightwell. He came here working in the ice plant over at 5th and Olive, and later actually operated the farmer's market up on Fleetwood Street. In the meantime, he lived with us, and he used to give me a nickel to get down to the cleaners and get his clothes and so forth. And he had an old automobile, and I don't remember the make of it, but we used to kid him about being able to start that car in any kind of weather. If it snowed, he'd start the car and it would shake and the snow would all fall off it and he'd keep going. So Leslie Brightwell was an interesting man.
When you were going to school, tell us what teenage years were like and what you did for entertainment.
That was, of course, the beginning of the big band era. And Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, all those big bands were playing at the Earl Theater in Philadelphia. In our teenage years, we had a band in Coatesville. Bill Ballantyne started the band, and then later Bill Short had the band. Blaine White played piano with him and so on.
How large was it?
It was about 10 or 12 pieces. They played for all our proms and our big dances and so forth. During our teenage years in high school, we used to go over to Sunnybrook, where all the big bands came and played for our dancing. That was every Saturday night. And then there was a place called Lester's over in Pottstown that sold barbecues and sodas, and it had a dance floor with a jukebox. And we used to go over there and dance there. And talking about jukeboxes, at Gibney's drugstore on 6th and Main, they had a basement that they cleaned up and put a jukebox down there. And we used to dance down in the Gibney's basement. And of course we went to the sporting events and so forth. We went up to, for another place to eat after the dances. We used to go up to a place called Smitty's, about 7 miles up the highway. He was an unusual man. He was a rather big man. He had big hands and so forth, and had one of the best barbecues that you could ever eat. And he was the nicest fellow with all we high school kids used to enjoy going up to see him.
You mentioned Coatesville sports teams. Did we have some pretty good teams back then?
Well, we used to like to think so. I played football starting in junior high school, and we went on. We had a championship junior high school team, and they thought when we got to be seniors, we'd have a championship team. Unfortunately, some of our players didn't make it all the way through, and those of us who did couldn't quite make the championship era, but we had about a 50-50 season, so we had a lot of fun. Well, I say during high school, we had a lot of activities, as they do now, and I like to participate in most of them. We had some plays. I was in the Meister Singers. Most people looking at this might not realize that because my voice leaves a lot to be desired right now. But I did participate in the Meister Singers, and we put on several operettas and so forth.
And your participation in the Meister Singers would have been in what years?
36 to 39.
And who was your director then?
Lawrence Ginter. Lawrence Ginter.
It's not a name I can
No.
recall.
He later on went to Westchester and was director of music over there. And I was president of our class, and we had a good time with that. I enjoyed working with all the teachers and so forth.
When you graduated from high school, which building was it?
The building that they're now using as Benner Elementary
Benner
School.
Elementary, and that was in what year? 39?
1939. We were the last class to graduate from the old school, 1939. And at that time, the building on the west was an elementary school, and then there was a building on the east, which was the trade school. And the building in the center housed both junior high and senior high students. We all went together. And of course, I went all 12 years there, living on Fleetwood Street. I went to elementary school and at the Main Street Elementary School, and then of course went through junior and senior high school, all at the same
At
place.
the same location.
That's most unusual for people to hear today,
Yes, it
because
is.
everyone goes to so many different schools before they graduate anymore.
Lunch prices. What'd you pay
Oh,
for
we got
lunch? in
lunch
school?
for about 25 cents.
25 cents. Okay. I know that your family had a family business. Tell us about that.
We had a family restaurant, which was Wilkinson's Third Avenue Restaurant, located just off Main Street at 9 North Third Avenue. They bought the restaurant when I was a junior in high school in 1937 and operated it until 1957. I had it just about 20 years.
20 years.
I didn't do much with the restaurant, being in school and later going to business school and then working in Philadelphia. But when I returned from the service, I spent 10 years working with my mother and dad, learning to cook and learning to manage the business, and enjoyed it very much. It was a real family-style restaurant. My mother did all the cooking and baking, baked her own pies, and she used to feel that every customer we had was a member of her family. And we had mostly regular customers. Many of the people who lived at the YMCA at that time and Coach and 4-In used to have their meals with us, actually most of them 3 meals a day. So it was enjoy. And when I say my mother used to think of them as family, for any of the men who were hunters or fishermen, if they would go out and hunt and shoot a rabbit and would clean it and dress it and so forth, she'd cook it for them because that was their only place to eat. Same way with fish. As long as they would take care of cleaning and cutting it and so forth, she would cook them, and then they'd have their dinner right in the restaurant with their own rabbits or fish. And she enjoyed that. She enjoyed helping them.
You sure couldn't find a restaurant to do that for you now.
No. And then, of course, she'd always bake a pie for them also. So it was a real event when something like that happened. And she used to bake pies to sell to families over the holidays and so forth. She used to get up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and she and I would go up and she'd bake the pies, and we'd have pies all over the restaurant cooling until people would start coming in and picking them up and so forth. And of course, it was always nice to eat good fresh pies out of the oven.
Oh, I'm sure.
I put on a good bit of weight while I was working there for 10 years.
What would a typical meal, say a hamburger, fries, and a soft drink, what would that sell for?
About 75 cents.
75
Yeah.
cents. Yeah.
A full meal with meat, 2 vegetables, coffee, and dessert would be 95 cents.
Oh. An expensive meal.
Right.
Ed, you came out of business school and went to work on the railroad.
I went to work in the Pennsylvania Railroad real estate office down in 30th Street, and worked there from June of 41 up till the war started, and December 7th, when we were attacked by Pearl Harbor. Growing up in a service family, my dad was a sergeant in the Army in World War I overseas. And I just knew that the place for me was in the service at that particular time. However, I heard so much about the Army all during my life. Pop talked about his, not what he did, but what so many other people did. And I was interested in the Navy. And because I waited till December 24th, the day before Christmas, when we had a half a day off down at the railroad, I enlisted in the Navy. Dad said that he understood that because when you're in the service, sometimes you get into pretty tight spots. And he said, always remember, you want to be there because you chose to be there, not because you were doing it for your father or friend or someone else. So he certainly understood. So I went in as an enlisted man, and I was enlisted for about a year. In the meantime, I had transferred from the enlisted ranks into the aviation cadet program, and went through the Naval Aviation program, and graduated, got my wings, and having met my wife, by the way, at business school.
Yes.
I neglected that, the most important part of business school. That's where I met Betty. She was from Woodbury, New Jersey, and when I graduated from Corpus Christi Naval Air Station, I came home, excuse me, and she and I were married. November 26th, our anniversary's coming up. This will be 53 years, married to the same woman. That's unusual these days, too.
And you brought her back to Coatesville.
Brought her to Coatesville, yes, yes. And as I say, I worked for Mother and Dad, and actually at the end managed the restaurant. And then Frank Bird, my former boss, who was supervisor of safety and plant protection at Lucan's.
I remember Frank.
He taught our Sunday school class in Olivet Church, and he asked me one Sunday whether or not I intended to make the restaurant business my lifelong business, and I said, well, it's interesting you say that, Frank, because I was 35 years old at the time, and I was sort of deciding what I was going to do, because I didn't enjoy the restaurant business. But he was just appointed supervisor of safety and plant protection, and he had a definite plan that he was going to implement at Lucan's as far as total accident control. And he said, I'm looking for people. He said, if you're interested, this was after Sunday school, one Sunday he asked me this. And he said, if you're interested, why don't you and Betty come up this afternoon, and I'll tell you what my plan is, and see what you think of it, and if you're interested, come and work for me. That was in '56, and I did that, and that was, other than being married, that was the luckiest day of my life that I went to work with Frank, because he was a fine gentleman, and enjoyed working for him very much.
Tell us about his plan. Had Lucan's had a bad safety record prior to that?
No, they had a fairly good record, but Frank was a most unusual man in that He was about 25 years ahead of his time in the field of accident prevention. I say that because many things coming out now as new ideas in the field of safety and accident prevention, we were doing at Lukens 25 years ago. And it was amazing. It's been amazing how when he left Lukens, he developed his own business called International Loss Control Institute. And he went around the world selling safety and accident prevention to many of the corporations internationally. A fellow by the name of George Germain, who was director of education at Lukens, did leave Lukens right after Frank and went with him. So both of them formed this business. He later, and I just talked to him not too long ago because he and George have rewritten a book that they started called Property Damage and Total Loss Control. And he called me to ask me about coming up with some names that he had worked with at Lukens, and he's providing them each with a book dedicated to them and helping him perfect his program here at Lukens. Kirk, it's interesting that we're having this interview at this particular time because I'm right in the midst of distributing these books individually. I've called most of the people, and there's about 28 people that either worked for Frank or were very cordial in helping him perfect his program at the plant. And it's interesting to review old times with many of them as I give them the book. He's written a dedication page and lists all the people that helped him. And it was interesting in that when he left Lukens and went with the INA insurance company, he developed another program down in Georgia. They had a building down there that wasn't being used, and they actually gave it to him to promote his program that he had developed at Lukens as well as in other areas. Of course, it wasn't copyrighted, so he was using his own material. And he went down to Atlanta, Georgia, and actually, in addition to all his other work, became an adjunct professor at Georgia State University. And then he worked with them in helping to develop a department that would promote accident control and accident prevention. So with all that, he eventually developed his own company, International Loss Control Institute, and actually had full-blown programs around the world. One of the main places that he was active was in the gold mining and diamond mining industry in South Africa. And Kirk, you know Frank, and you know how big a man he was.
Oh, yeah.
He's 6'2" and
Yes.
weighs about 300 pounds. I'll never forget him telling me about the first time he went down into the gold mine in South Africa. He said these mines were made for little people. He said I had to crawl around on my hands and knees. But he developed quite a relationship with that group down there, and for the last 6 years that he continued at his company, he spent about 3 months in Johannesburg, South Africa. He would set up a conference in one of the large hotels there, and all the manufacturers, whether it was gold or diamonds or whatever, would come, and he would provide conferences for them on total loss control. Now, when I say total loss control, this is in addition to safety, because usually when you think about safety, you think about saving lives and keeping people from becoming injured and damaging equipment, which is all very important. But he developed, as a part of his program, anything that would amount to a loss for a company. Absenteeism, illness, bad quality, poor production, and he would have a team of people, and actually I participated with him, have a team of people go into a corporation and visit a plant or as many plants as they had and sort of audit their whole operation and provide them with a definite written audit of what he feels could improve by instigating his program. And he made out very well all around the world. When he decided to retire, or sort of semi-retire, I don't think Frank will ever retire altogether, but he merged with a company from Norway, Norske Veritas, and that was an organization that was initiated back through the years in the shipping industry. And of course, I'm sure you can imagine the safety and life-saving activities that are needed in the shipping industry. But they have developed a total program as well. So now he and George Germain are consultants for that organization. And actually, their office in this country is located in Loganville, Georgia, where Frank's business was originated. So it's an interesting thing, and I'm having a ball contacting people and talking over old times.
Yes, I'm
sure. We old folks enjoy doing that a lot.
Tell me, Ed, after Frank's departure from Lukens, what was your role then in the safety department?
Well, I was fortunate in that while Frank was here, I was his assistant. And when he left, I became supervisor of safety and plant protection. And that was quite a thrill. And they were big shoes to fill when he left. But we had an interesting relationship in that he was going out of the manufacturing business into insurance and consulting business. And he needed an organization that had a factory where with his ideas, and he could come up with so many ideas and have so many programs, he would use to filter them through Lukens. And we would sort of try them out in a manufacturing organization, because with a steel plant, you have just about every type of activity, plumbing, heating, carpentry, and so forth. And we actually would initiate some of his programs to help us out and later on help him. And I became a consultant with him in his International Loss Control Institute. And I used to take vacation time and get down and participate with him in a conference and so forth, where he would have management and safety people from around the world come and participate in conferences with him. So that was an interesting experience.
Were there any specific issues or situations while you were with Lukens as safety director that resulted in some changes there, and maybe give us some background on why these changes occurred?
Yes, and one of the big ones was developing a property damage program to be included with the injury and prevention program. And it was interesting that no one realized how many different times the same piece of equipment or the same product was being damaged. Now, I'm differentiating between wear and tear and damage, because naturally all machinery wears out from time to time. But we concentrated on anything that was damaged through misuse or through any kind of accident. And it was amazing the amount of money that we were able to prove that it cost Lukens and any other company, where they could prevent many of the repetitive type damages. I can give you two examples. When we started out, or before we actually initiated the program, we developed a program of big sliding doors in one of the buildings out in the west side, where the big trucks would back in, load the plates on, and then pull it out. Well, if the plates weren't loaded properly, they'd pull the doors out when they pulled the truck out. And we discovered that they did damaged this one door 9 times in a year. And up to that point, that repair was just included in the overall damage or overall repair work. And they never differentiated with the costs. So we kept track of materials and time, and that's all, because there's so many other times. other things to do, but we kept track of the materials and time that it took for repair during the 9 times a year. The other most interesting thing is
How did you remedy the situation to prevent it from happening 9 times the next year?
well, we made sure that the crane operators had more training to lower the plates and put them on the tractor trailers properly, and made sure that the workers on the ground had sticks that they could use, not their hands, but use sticks, so that they could guide the plates on the trailer, and they would be lined up properly so they'd pull them out without any damage. It's amazing. It's so easy, really. Very common sense. The other most interesting thing is the plant uses a lot of oxygen hose, because they use oxygen all over the plant. And that's hose that's similar to a garden hose, although it provides oxygen. And we were finding out that they were using a lot of extra hose. And again, took a survey for a year and just kept track of the hose itself, not the work it would take to replace the hose or anything, just the extra hose that were damaged. A foot-long piece, a 3-foot long or whatever, and found out that they were spending at least $25,000 to $30,000 a year in extra oxygen hose that needn't be changed because of accident. They'd lower a plate and sit it on the oxygen hose. They'd cut it off by putting it on a sharp edge, and so many things that we were able to prove that this needn't be done if proper instruction and proper use of the hose was instituted. So those were just 2 examples. And the book that I'm distributing now is a rewrite of the property damage book that Frank and George wrote while they were at Lucan's. But now, through their experiences around the world, they've added a lot to it.
Ed, I'm sure that some of your work as a safety director with Lucan's has carried over into your affiliation with the Red Cross. Tell us about that.
We were active in the Red Cross with both first aid and swimming. Frank was very active in the Red Cross through the years while he was in college, and he carried that on. And I say we, the fellows that worked with Frank, took courses in Red Cross and provided training for Lucan's employees and their families, both in first aid and in swimming. We used to conduct courses in the evening for employees and their families with first aid. With the swimming, we got Lucan's executives who owned a swimming pool to provide a certain amount of time, usually on a Saturday morning. They weren't using their pool at all, and we asked them to let us have it for 3 or 4 hours, and had families with children come up, and we actually taught them to swim, and took them all the way through, those who were interested, up into the life-saving program of the Red Cross in the water. So we did a lot of that. One of the most interesting experiences I recall with Frank going over to Westchester University. He had gotten in touch with the man who was involved in safety and accident prevention over there, and they had a couple of courses that they included with their teaching program. And he felt that if he could work with them, with some of the handicapped children in the swimming pool over there. And Kirk, that was a very satisfying experience to work with those kids who never had been in a swimming pool before. And the delight you could see in their eyes, just being able to be in the pool with some assistance from us. They had the time of their lives. And it was amazing how they could tread water many times with a little assistance and so forth. So we did a lot of that. Then to carry on with first aid and rescue work, we developed in our own fire department at Lucan's. You know, Lucan's has its own fire department. And Ted Rissell was our fire chief. or Chief of Fire and Rescue, as we renamed his title. He worked very closely in the first aid program, and he and I worked with developing first aid training for ambulance attendants. Ted was very active with that program later on, and actually spent some time at invitation at the Coatesville Hospital in training for rescue work. And we had one of the first ambulances that you see out on the road now. First, it's built like a truck, rather than, you remember the old ambulance used to look like a hearse.
Yes.
And you couldn't do anything in the ambulance.
Right.
So they decided that if you had a box-like truck, that you could administer first aid to accident victims on the way to the hospital. It would save a lot of lives and so forth. And actually, Ted was very instrumental in providing a program, working with the doctors at Coatesville Hospital, for 125 ambulance attendants around Chester County. And we actually, before the state had a emergency medical training program that they have now, which is an excellent program, we actually trained people in the county to administer first aid and encourage them to use their vehicles as first aid stations,
Right.
rather than race cars running through red lights and so forth, and putting other people in danger to get to the hospital.
And this would have been what year?
That was in 1960, in the mid-60s.
Mid-60s.
And that actually was the beginning of the program in Chester County, right from Lukens. We started our own program and then instituted it throughout the county.
Ed, I know you've spent quite a number of years associated with the Olivet Methodist Church in Coatesville in a variety of capacities, both as a lay leader and a Sunday school teacher. How did that come about?
That's interesting, Kirk. As I said, I went to work with Frank Bird on October 5th. I remember the date. And about the first week in December, he called me into his office and said, Ed, I need a favor, and I think you can help me out. And of course, just going to work for the man, I said, sure, Frank, whatever, just tell me what it is. He said, I would like you to teach the Sunday school class the Sunday before Christmas. And I gulped, and I said, Frank, I've never taught anyone. I said, I did do a little teaching someone to fly an airplane. I was an instructor near the end of the war. Oh, he said, don't worry about it. Usually, Frank's usual term, don't worry about it. I'll help you, I'll provide all the materials. Because he and Esther, his wife, wanted to go to Florida because her sister lived in Florida. And I said, all right, Frank, if you think I can do it. So fortunately, I knew that story pretty well. It was the Sunday before Christmas. So that helped. But he did provide me with the Tarbell's Teacher's Guide. And would you believe I have every issue, or every book that was printed from 1956 up to the present day. I still use it today. And this December, the Sunday before Christmas, will be 41 years that I've been teaching a men's Bible class. And it's been an interesting experience. I started with, as I say, Frank was the regular teacher, and I started substituting for him each time he went away. And then eventually it became once a month, and then twice a month. And then finally he changed churches, went down to the Thorndale Methodist Church. So I became the full-time teacher and have been doing it ever since. And it's been an interesting experience. As a result of that, he suggested that I become a lay speaker in the Methodist Church. And I was able to do that, and that has been an interesting experience my whole life. I have a fellow now by the name of Tom Edwards, who substitutes for me every once in a while. And I think back through the years when I used to substitute with Frank, and now this young man substituting for me. Not that I'm getting that old, of course, but
But-
that does work that way.
But Frank taught you well how to make a smooth transition. Huh?
Right. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, it's been an interesting life. I've been very fortunate. I'm glad I stayed in Coatesville.
Well, I did want to ask you, I know that you and Betty have traveled all over the world. You've been to many different countries throughout the world, but you keep coming back to Coatesville for your retirement years. What is the attraction?
Well, of course, being a native, that says something, but with all our travels, I have never seen anywhere that is more beautiful than Chester and Lancaster County. There are many places that we enjoyed so much, and they were beautiful, but I would never want to change where we live, as we enjoy Chester and Lancaster County, particularly Chester County. And Pennsylvania is a beautiful, beautiful state. But it's been interesting. We've been fortunate in being able to travel as much as we have. We were just mentioning the other night that we haven't been on a long trip since 1988. We went to New Zealand and Australia. One of the reasons being that her mother and her twin sister and husband all became quite ill. And for about 5 years there, we didn't really want to go. They've all passed away now, and it's been a couple of years that we haven't done anything. But we're thinking about doing something. Betty wants to go to Russia, and I want to go to Africa. And I don't know. We'll go together wherever it is, but you know how that works.
Yes. Russia, here comes Ed. Well, Ed, I certainly want to thank you for being with us today and sharing some of your memories of Coatesville. It's been very enlightening to have you with us. Thank you again.
Kirk, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.